Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Love of Life podcast. We have joining us tonight the one and only Paul McCusker. Coming up next.
Christian education, because it serves him who says, I am the way, the truth, and the light, is the love of life.
This is the Love of Life podcast, conversations with Jesse and Courtney. All right, and we're back. Paul is with us. Paul is best known for his work on the long-running children's audio program, Adventures in Odyssey, and award-winning radio theater productions for the Augustine Institute and Focus on the Family. His published works include The Adventures of Nick and Sam, First Reader Series, The Virtue Chronicles, the Imagination Station book series, the Passages series, adult mysteries and thrillers, biographies, plays, and musicals, and just so much more. Paul, thank you so much for joining us.
No, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
Absolutely. So P.G. Wodehouse, he once said, I started writing at the age of 5. Before that, I was probably just loafing. How old were you, Paul, when you started writing?
Well, it was at the point when I could actually start writing, when I could hold something in my hand and actually write. Oh. I may have scribbled and done some drawings before then, like little kids do. But pretty much at the point when I began to understand words and how to write them down is when I started. So it was probably about 5, and it's true. I think I was just loafing before that.
Did you know then that you wanted to be a full-time writer, like in your career, or did that develop later?
Well, it had to come later because I think, when you're 5 and you're in elementary school and even up into junior high and everything, the idea of being a writer is a very vague, well, the idea of any career, when you're little, you're not even thinking of anything except what I want to be when I grow up. But, that's usually something really sensational. I don't know that I remember when I grow up, I want to be a writer, because that seemed bizarrely, somehow being an astronaut or a fireman or all those seemed attainable, but it almost seems silly to say, well, when I grow up, I want to be a writer. Because, I didn't know, there was no one in my life. I guess if I came from a family of writers, then it might make sense to me to think, oh, you can actually make a living doing this. But, who at 5 is thinking about making a living at all, except, right. But really, it was much later, probably when I was in college, that it seemed attainable. It seemed like something I could actually do. Not just wishful thinking, but as something that I might want to direct myself to as a career of some sort.
Yeah. How did you then go from writing and how did you get into radio theater, radio drama? How did that come about?
Well, that the short version is that I think it started because I was writing stage dramas for my church. I went to a very arts-minded church. So I had an outlet for creating short sketches, one-act plays, then full-length plays. And through that, I became connected to Chuck Bolte and a group called the Jeremiah People, which was a subset of the Continental Ministries out of California. And the Jeremiah People would come to my church like every year through the 70s. I think there were just multiple years in a row where they would come in, and that was an influence on me because they were funny. They were moving. They were just, as I was getting older, I found a lot of what I saw that was called Christian was fairly embarrassing. And these guys were not. And the writing and the way they approached what they did, to me, had the right level of just all the right combination of things. So it's interesting because it's a handoff thing. So they come to my church. They kind of inspire me in the sense of writing or what I could write. Because originally I thought, well, I want to be a novelist. But at our church, I had the opportunity to do sketches. Well, if I'm going to write sketches, I want to write sketches kind of like they were doing. And so that influenced me. Well, then as I started writing, Chuck and I became friends. And anybody who knows Odyssey knows that Chuck Bolte for the first several years of Odyssey, was the executive producer. Well, that's the connection. So I wound up moving from Maryland to California, working with Chuck at the Continental offices, writing for Jeremiah People. And then Chuck was consulting with Focus on the Family, which I'd never heard of. Focus on the Family. And they started to do these audio dramas. And so he came back one day and said, look, they need writers. Do you have any interest in writing audio dramas? And I think my first question really was, well, do they actually pay anything? And the answer was, well, no, they actually do. This is a good organization. They'll pay. And I went, well, I'm game. I'll give it a try. And I had dabbled with, I had this little reel-to-reel recorder. That just shows how old I am. It was a reel-to-reel, and I used to actually create little radio dramas, little audio dramas on it with sound effects. And I mean, they were just ridiculous, but I love to play with sound. But again, you never think, well, I can somehow take this and turn it into something, that would actually be a career. So it was through Chuck that I got connected to Focus, and then the program, it was Family Portraits that later became, Odyssey USA, which then became Adventures in Odyssey. And I was writing for them as a freelancer on the Family Portraits series. I did one episode, and then they asked me to come on board full time to work with them. And then that's kind of where that I said yes, and then I've been doing that for the vast majority of my adult life, such as it is.
When you began that, did you have any idea that Odyssey would be such a big hit, or was it kind of this just new experiment?
More of an experiment. I think Phil Lawler and I and the gang in the beginning, you can never predict, or you never think, well, this will last, for X number of years. You're just thinking, we're doing our job now, and we're going to do the best that we can. And there was an excitement of the experimentation because we knew we weren't going to do it like old-time radio drama. We instinctively felt it needed to be something more dynamic. And in fact, it was kind of a clean slate for us. We knew the old radio dramas and the influences those could have on us, but we were also part of the MTV generation, which was very visual. And I think we instinctively began to think in terms of, well, we're going to do it, but, we're going to do it as we do it, which will turn out to be different somehow. And so that really was, so I think you pegged it with the word experimental. I don't know that we were thinking it was going to be a hit, because how do you have a hit with an audio drama anyway? I mean, at the time, people said we were crazy for doing it because it was the MTV generation. And it was like, well, okay, good luck, but you're not really going to get much of an audience, because who listens to audio dramas now? Nobody. So when we started it, I don't know that, again, much like when I was 5, I wasn't thinking of longevity. I wasn't thinking of anything beyond doing the immediate thing. And I don't think the rest of the team, I think we all just felt, well, we were doing something we thought was good and worth doing. And we were doing it to the best we could. But ultimately, you were sort of sending it out there and wondering, well, will anyone hear it? And if they hear it, will they like it? And to what degree will they like it? I mean, we just couldn't have known, not really. I don't think we had a magic moment where we all suddenly went, oh, this is going to be huge. If anybody had that, it wasn't me.
When did that moment finally hit, though, where you realized, oh, kids around the world are listening to Adventures in Odyssey? Was it in the 80s or was it the early 90s that actually took real shape?
Probably more into the 90s, because in the first few years, we're getting it out there. And the means by which people could get in touch with us, in many ways was limited. So we'd have letters coming in and people would be asking us questions. And that became an indicator that at least people were listening or paying attention and then asking us questions, or people were writing to Chris, because she would say at the end of the show, have you ever had this experience? And write and tell me about it. So the number of letters coming in, as those increased, and as we began to hear stories of listeners, why a particular show meant a lot to them, or to the negative, how they might react to a show that they disagreed with or didn't like, told us that the listenership was growing. And so that that helped. And then in the 90s, we just began to see this escalation. And the escalation became more obvious, and we thought, oh, well, something's happening here.
Was there any particular feedback that really stuck out to you from a listener? Anything that's maybe stayed with you?
Well, the testimonials did. When we do a show like Karen, which was about a girl that died of cancer, and we began to hear from people who told us how much that show meant to them because somebody they loved had died of cancer, or even girls who had cancer were writing to us. When we were getting those kinds of letters, or one of the famous ones that we often talk about is there was a listener who wrote to us and said, basically, he's so connected with Eugene that I think he wrote and said, basically, I'm not a Christian, but if Eugene ever becomes a Christian, then I might do that.
Wow.
Well, after Eugene became a Christian, we got letters, and from this person, but from other people who, and one in particular, who said he was listening, he was driving. It was like he's on a major interstate or something. He was driving. Eugene, in the episode, The Time Has Come, where Eugene becomes a Christian, he was so moved by it that he pulled over. And he wrote to us later, he said, I pulled over and I prayed to accept Jesus into my heart. And then I called Focus on the Family to ask them if I had done it properly. So when we started getting letters and we started hearing from people who began to talk about Odyssey at that level, not just as entertainment, but as something that was touching them more deeply, that became very meaningful for us. That's very humbling and certainly meaningful, and the right kind of the right kind of affirmation. Not ego strokes, but just affirmation that, well, we're doing the right thing. We continue to do our best. And if it's speaking to them, then that's wonderful. And now that we're in, a second, third generation, and you're talking to people your age who says they grew up with Odyssey, and now they've got kids, and then you've got other grandkids who are listening. And then I'm hearing from artists, people who are producers, people who are actually in filmmaking and things like that, saying, well, the reason I want to do what I'm doing is because you guys did what you did.
Yeah.
And that hit me at a whole other level when I thought, oh, so the show is inspiring people to actually do what we do, but hopefully doing it better and in other fields. And that part of it was incredibly gratifying, I think, for all of us too. Yeah. To think that it might be sort of reproducing itself. Seeds are planted, and then it's now giving a different kind of harvest than we probably even expected.
Yeah. What would you say are some of the key components of creating high quality Christian content? How do you not make it too corny or too cheesy? Obviously, there's some things in Odyssey that are corny, but it works. And it's good.
Well, yeah, and if it's corny, it's intentional. See, and I think that's a big part of it. If you're doing it, you're doing it. It's not by accident. But honestly, I take Christian out of that question, because to a great degree, what makes for a good story is what you're really dealing with. And whatever the art is, whether you're painting or sculpting or whatever, composing a song, the main thing is not necessarily to be agenda driven, but to bring to bear the discipline of good craft, what you're doing, whether it's telling stories or writing songs or whatever. Do it and do it well. And to do it well doesn't mean the end result of the impact, meaning, because I think when I was growing up, a lot of times the litmus test for effectiveness was it good? Was it well made? Was it good in that respect? Not morally good, but in the sense of craft. It was, well, did they come to Jesus or not? so it was often measured by the end result and the impact it would have spiritually, which the best stories and the best art forms, it took me a long time to realize, in many ways, you can't measure by that. In fact, it's a misnomer to try to measure by that, because art, by virtue of what it is, operates in a different way. And so what I learned over the years was, you have the rightful place of proclamation, and Jesus did this, and pastors do it, people do it. They proclaim the truth in that way that leaves little room for anything other than, I'm receiving what you're saying and I either accept it or reject it, whatever the case may be. But with art, I think art is more exploration. The best art is an exploration. And by that doesn't mean you don't know where you're going. In fact, just the opposite. You know where you're going, but what you're doing is inviting people to come with you. Mm-hmm. And you're saying, we're going to explore some ideas together, whether it's a painting and you're looking at, Rembrandt's Prodigal Son, going, what did he do there? And look, why did he make those choices? And Rembrandt saying, I'm going to show you something, or Michelangelo, or a great song or a great story is basically, let me kind of put this out there and let's explore it together and see what conclusions we come to. And again, it doesn't mean that as a writer, I don't know what I'm trying to do, and I don't know what my themes are, or if there are messages, what those might be. But the craft of telling a good story and then letting those themes work themselves out in a credible way is very different from a proclamation where you're then inviting people to come forward, a Billy Graham moment of bringing people forward or something like that. So it's a long-winded answer, but I hope I got to what you were asking.
That's good.
Which is that I think, and I honestly think that with Odyssey, if there's a secret sauce, I think the truth of the secret sauce is we worked hard not to be overt in our messages, even though we could be. But if we were going to be, hopefully we did it in an entertaining way. Mm-hmm. And I think the other secret with Odyssey is it is a place you really do want to be with people you like hanging out with. And I think that makes a huge difference. So they're going to have conflicts, that things are going to happen, but you care about these characters and you care about what happens to them. And so really you just like being there with them. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I think it took me a long time to realize that was a big part of it.
Yeah.
And I think that's, if you think about most of the series that you really like, that's probably a big part of it. Mm-hmm. It's not just the excitement or the cliffhanger or whatever. You really do have to like the main characters and like who they are and care about what happens to them.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a place we've never really left. Since I was a child, I've never. There are people that say they've kind of grown up and grown out of it, but frankly, we've introduced our kids to it. My parents still will listen to it. They'll, ask about it, and we'll talk about Odyssey, and so it's definitely one of those things that we have continued on, and we don't want to leave it. Kind of reminds me of Lewis when he writes to Lucy Barfield at the beginning of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, when he says, someday you'll be old enough for fairy tales again. It's like,
yes.
You don't really ever have to grow out of the good fairy tales or the good stories. Adventures in Odyssey is definitely one of those.
And it's funny because we would talk to kids who, it's like they'd hit 12, 13, or 14, and they would kind of, that's little kids stuff, and they would sort of outgrow it. But then and you do something long enough and you see these sorts of things. Then we saw them change. We saw it. They'd come back at 18, 19, 20, sometimes when they were in college, because they'd go off to college and they would want to, they kind of want a piece of home.
Yeah.
We heard from people overseas in the military in Afghanistan or in all these foreign countries taking Odyssey with them. Not only because they loved it, because it reminded them home. It was like taking home with them. And the same thing, we heard, I remember a story of one guy who wound up going to a college, a fairly staunchly secular college. And he's a Christian and thinking, how in the world am I going to meet anybody? So he had this idea and he thought it's like a secret handshake. He said, I'm going to have a pizza night in our common area and invite people to come listen to Adventures in Odyssey. So he put up these notices and all he said was pizza night with Adventures in Odyssey without explaining what it was, because he thought if they know what it is, I don't have to explain it. And maybe I'll actually get to meet a couple of people who could be my friends now that I'm at this new school. And he had dozens of people show up. He had to order all this pizza and they filled out the room. And he said, I just had all these people and I became friends with them. And I thought, I never thought of that as a good way to meet people, is do an Odyssey club with some pizza and then you can meet people. But it really is almost like that secret handshake.
Yeah.
It's sort of that mention Odyssey. And if either they know what you're talking about or they don't.
That's right.
Yes, you're in good company if you're with somebody who also enjoys Odyssey. Do you have a personal?
I would hope so.
Right.
You are. Do you have a personal favorite character?
Well, I have great affection for most of the characters, which sounds like a cop-out, but I do like them for different reasons and in different ways, depending on, especially if I'm writing for them. And you see what they're getting into, and these especially poignant moments when you see some of the characters kind of get into things that are heart-wrenching, or learning curves for them in terms of their journeys. And so honestly, I don't. They all had, I had different affection for them. And especially working on a show for a long time, and then of course working with these amazing actors. I honestly don't know that I could. Some were more favorite than others at times, depending on what we were doing. So it kind of, there was an ebb and flow to it. So I don't mean to give you a cop out on that. It's just I'm not entirely sure that I can pick one character as a favorite. Except I will admit that some characters can be more fun to write for than others. Others, are great to write for because they're good characters. But there were some that you just sort of liked, I don't know, something about it when you're sitting down and you're working on the script. Their lines just sort of come in from somewhere. Wooten was always like that. Harlow Doyle was a bit like that. I loved to write for Eugene, especially in certain contexts. Eugene and Connie, especially when they were playing off of each other.
Yeah.
Where you just sort of get this chemistry, this dynamic that was fun to write for. And so, yeah, it always varied in that respect.
When you wrote for Eugene, did you have to pick up Webster's 1828 dictionary to pull out the words for Eugene?
Actually, a lot of times we did. And you think when the show started, it was pre-internet. So, to do the research for him to know what he knew.
Right.
Because I'm the first to, I've always said, I am not as smart as Eugene. I'm not as wise as Wit. Mm-hmm. And that being the case, I just, you kind of have to go to a lot of source material to figure it all out.
No doubt. No doubt. They say every writer is also a reader. So what are your personal reading habits and what are your writing habits?
Well, my writing, I wish I could read as much as I've been writing these days. That's a very good question. No, I'm still an avid reader. I don't know that I'm reading as much now as I used to. But I will read. I think what happened is over the years, I began to read more and more related to what I was working on. So I might have certain things that I'm working on or not working on, but I'm reading just for enjoyment or because I'm fascinated by how this storyteller is telling this story, or fiction, or a lot of nonfiction. I'm surrounded by books that a lot of them are historical books, because when I'm writing about certain periods, I really want to dig in deep to what was going on, the context. So, and then I pull out, classics. Right now I'm looking at just off here to my left, and I've got Dune, because I'd never read Dune.
Yeah.
And I did see the movie that they did and thought, oh, well, I'd like to, maybe it's time for me to go back, because I'm not a big sci-fi person. And I'm not even big in fantasy. I mean, my wife had to kind of twist my arm. She pretty much said I couldn't watch the movies, the Lord of the Rings movies, unless I read the books first.
Oh.
So, and I was glad she did that.
Yeah.
So I read the books, saw the movies, like read one, the movie came out, read the other one, the next movie came out. So this was, 20 years ago. Right. And so, yeah, my reading is all over the place, but I think it's true. I think there's a great, I think you need to read to see what people do with words, not only just for taking in information, but to find inspiration. Mm-hmm. But then again, you do that through other audio dramas. You can do it through our own audio drama. Sometimes I listen to the work of the other writers and other people who I find inspiring, because they come up with great stuff. But certainly movies and a lot of TV programs, even if I don't agree with them, I can find them inspiring. I've got some writers who I like how they tell stories, but I don't necessarily like the stories that they're telling, if that makes sense. Yeah. So, but I think reading is a big part of input. Let's just say input is a big part of writing, because there is a point where the well can run dry. There's a point when you want the waters to stir. You need them to stir. You need the inspiration. And sometimes you don't even know that you're reading something that's going to inspire you on a project 3 years from now, which happens to me a lot. I'll take something in and then not related to anything I'm doing, and then a year later, 2 years later, I'm working on something and remember it.
Oh, that's amazing. So you've already kind of alluded to some things, but are there any, besides taking in good content and working on craft, are there any other disciplines that you can pinpoint that have really been a part of giving you such a long and successful career?
Well, I think just doing it has probably been it. It's just staying with it. I mean, I really am the last person in the world to give people career advice, because I can't account for my career. All I did was follow up opportunities, that things kind of came up, and you say yes to things, you say no to things, and you hopefully develop an instinct to know which is going to lead to something that hopefully would be good. And by good, I mean, I've taken writing projects strictly for the experience of doing it. Oh, I haven't done that. I'll do that. I'd like to see how I do with that, just to try it. So in terms of my overall career, it's a combination of, God-given opportunities that I took on, doing my best, doing the very best that I could, treating all projects in a sense as my own, to apply myself to them, as bringing the best to bear of discipline, of craft, of intuition, hopefully, and going from there, really. But anybody who talks about writing that isn't writing, that I'm very skeptical that they want to be writers. The first thing is, well, if you want to be a writer, then write and keep writing until it becomes obvious to you that you really don't want to be a writer, whatever the case may be. But doing it, I mean, it sounds like a cliche, but doing it is the main thing, I think.
Sure. Someone once said the best arguments in the world won't change a person's mind. The only thing that can do that is a good story. Why is story so compelling to us? You kind of hit on that a few minutes ago, but what is the essence of story as just human beings, Christian or non? Just why is story?
Well, you just answered the question. It's human beings, because ideas are objective to a great degree. Even if they're subjectively given, they're objective. And you can accept or reject. Again, we're back to proclamation. You can say, for God so loved the world that he gave his only son. And immediately somebody's thinking, do I believe in God? What do you mean by his son? What do you mean gave? They're immediately dissecting. They're immediately sort of taking your proposition and determining whether it's true or not. And to a great degree, then that's disembodied. A philosophical point of view is disembodied from humanity. So in a way, we can detach from it, and then we can decide, well, does it appeal to me? Does it make sense? Do I agree with this? If I do, why? If I don't, why don't I? But there's this detachment that happens. Whereas storytelling, like the best art forms, humanizes everything. If you're telling a good story, even if it's Winnie the Pooh, even if it's about a robot, everything at essence, the greatest stories are about humanity. Humanity as played out even through non-human beings, but the essence of those stories is all about our humanity. And our humanity attached to how we interact with each other, what we think of ourselves, what do we think of life, what do the characters think of things, and then ultimately a story as part of a bigger story if you're going to explore that. It's undeniable that when you're reading, Frodo and the gang and their adventures in Lord of the Rings, that you're reading about something bigger. And then you see how their story is part of a much bigger story. All those characters are part of a much bigger story than just their moment in it. And I think that's also what story does. It nudges us in the direction of bigger truths, of bigger things, even when we're not consciously arguing about them. You can argue with a proclamation, but when you're dealing with a character who's making choices true to the character, and you don't agree with those choices, or you do agree, you're rolling with it, and you're sort of disarmed from that dispassionate right, wrong, good, bad. You're in terms of, do I agree with the decisions or not? So if you're listening to Odyssey and whatever Wit is doing, or Eugene or Wooten or Connie or whoever it is, you're kind of engaged and you're rolling along with what those characters are doing. You may dissect later, do I agree, don't agree, why did I, didn't I, whatever that may be. But that's a later process. When you're in the story, you're living the story. And then that's the disarming thing, I think, when it comes to why story can be, or art can be, more effective. You listen to a song. I mean, there's songs that I love that I don't agree with at all from point of view or morality, but they're really good songs.
Mm-hmm.
And they might move me. They might make me feel things I wouldn't otherwise feel, in a way that if somebody took that exact same thing and wrote it as an essay, I'm not necessarily going to respond to it, in that way, or if at all.
Sure.
Well, speaking of good stories, will there be any more Father Gilberts or anything like it?
Father Gilbert, yes. Well, see, it's funny. That's a funny question, because I may get that question more than almost any other that I get.
They were
Wow.
so good.
So the short answer is I would love to do more Father Gilberts. It's just a question of money and time. Somebody putting up the money to do them, to create them. And then me with my overcommitment that I'm always guilty of. I'm always in trouble of overcommitting, is to go back into that world and actually then have the time to create the next stories. I think I still have a lot of notes for where I intended to go. And I think that after we finish the 9, so it kind of has a gentle punctuation mark, a semicolon rather than a full stop. So I took him to a certain point, and then I did 2 novels. So there are 2 novels that follow exactly where the series left off. And so it kind of nudged it forward, but I didn't go too far, because I kept thinking, well, at some point I may be able to pick this up as an audio drama. And what do I do with this then if the opportunity comes up? So I miss Father Gilbert. Honestly,
So do we.
I miss writing. Yeah, I miss writing for Father Gilbert and Mrs. Mayhew and those kinds of stories.
Yeah, they're wonderful. And they're just a great example of really mature content and interesting themes and being done in such a great way, and not in a graphic way or not overdone. Even with some of the material and the things that you handle, like we can listen to it even with our kids. It's mature enough, but it's not doesn't cross a line. So yeah, we just,
well, I hope not. It's funny. I think that's probably the Odyssey influence, because even the stuff I write now, as I'm getting into, I mean, tough areas, or if I'm writing about something, my Odyssey instincts kick in, and they really do kick in, not to turn something into, saccharine, or to homogenize it, but to figure out, how can I do this so that it still has the right dramatic impact, but doesn't traumatize or doesn't unduly shock. Because as a writer, I've always said that the problem with, the shock is that people remember the shock, but they don't remember the value of whatever it is you were doing, and so I think Odyssey helped me a lot with that, with Father Gilbert and other things I've done since, which is just trying to find the right balance, not to be gratuitous, not to go too far. Now, I mean, parents always have to decide, and all kids have different sensibilities, and you, as good parents, you would know, well, she may be able to listen to this, but you know what? This may be too troubling for him. And so you make those choices. And we used to put disclaimers about ages and stuff, just to protect, so that if parents didn't listen first, we didn't want to get in trouble when the kids are, the parents are going, "You were listening to what?
Yeah.
What happened?"
Yeah, those were my favorite episodes.
yes. Actually, we used to hear from kids. It's like as soon as Chris would come on and say, get your parents to listen to this first. Yeah, the kids. We knew the listeners were immediately going, well, maybe I'll go get my parents. Maybe I'll just listen first to find out what it is they may not want me to hear. But that always meant, it meant something juicy was going to happen.
Yeah. Those were always my favorite. Speaking of parenting, what were bedtime stories like at your house growing up? I know I believe your bio says you have 2 kids. I assume they're grown.
Yeah,
they're grown up now.
It's funny. Yeah, well, I know. Yeah, my no grandkids as such, but no. When my kids were growing up, we used to read. Well, we had all kinds of books. I mean, everything from early on Goodnight Moon to other. I mean, at some point, I remember reading to my son The Hobbit. But we always had these books, and some were favorites, so we read them like every night. And then I would make up stories. And I remember I started with my son, who was older. I mean, he's 2 years older than my daughter, but, and I personalize it. So it'd be once upon a time, there was a boy named Tommy. That's my son. And he had a dog named, I think it was Sparkle or something. And so I would make up stories pretty much on the spot. And then I did that with my daughter, though she was funny. Her name's Ellie, and she's 21 now, but she was funny because I just remember vividly, I'd start to read a story, and she'd put her hands on the book, or she'd close the book, and she'd go, no, Daddy, tell me a story with your own mouth. And I thought, I know what you mean. You want me to make it up. But then what she would do is I'd say, well, once upon a time, there was a girl named Ellie. And one day, and I think she had a cat. I'm trying to remember the name of the cat. I'd have to ask her. But I'd say, and one day, Ellie decided to go to the park. And then Ellie would say, oh, no, Daddy. No. She went to the playground. So she'd correct my story. And they go, okay, she went to the playground. And then she walked over, and every plot point, she would stop me and go, oh, no, not there. And she so she didn't realize, I mean, she was 2 years old or whatever, but she was making up stories with my stories, but she was editing me as I went along, which she still does, by the way, but in a different way. So, we loved, I actually loved the bedtime experience, and I enjoyed making up the stories. But I also enjoyed reading them. And then with The Goodnight Moon, we got to a point where these books so well that I actually started reading them backwards.
Mm.
I did them completely in reverse, word for word backwards. And I would do that occasionally just to break things up a bit. But yeah, that was a big, because I don't remember when I was growing up having stories read to me.
Mm.
We had some books, and I remember, when I could reading, little books, Dr. Seuss or certain things like that. But no, that wasn't part of my upbringing, but we certainly wanted it to be part of my kids.
Sure.
And they did listen to Odyssey for quite a bit. It was in the car.
Yeah.
For them.
There wasn't any evening where they're like, Dad, don't tell us a bedtime story. We'd rather listen to Wit tonight. Did they ever try to?
They actually, it's funny for my family and for my kids in particular, Odyssey was in the car.
Wow.
It wasn't in the house. Yeah. When we were in the house, I don't remember, except maybe special occasions like, it's Christmas and we're decorating and we'd put on one of the Odyssey Christmas episodes.
Sure.
But no, it was a car thing for them, not inside the house.
Interesting.
But and I will say this, all parents know this. It's a very poignant thing to admit. And that is the observation that you never know when you've come to the last of something. Kids do not announce. And suddenly you don't even know the date. You don't know when it happened, but you're not reading stories to them anymore.
Yeah.
Bedtime has changed. It's a completely different thing. Who am I looking at?
This is Eden.
God, who is that? Who is it? Hold up. Ethan?
Eden.
Oh, Eden. Oh, sweet. Hey, Eden. Hey, baby.
Say hi.
It's like, I don't even know what this is.
What in the world's going on?
Yeah.
Who are some of your main influences, either growing up or now presently?
Well, I have to think about that. I mean, C.S. Lewis still remains kind of ever present. In fact, I was just reading about him earlier, and I'm teaching a course right now about the Screwtape Letters. It's an online thing. And I was going back through some of that. And so there are people like Lewis, Tolkien. Like I said, I'm reading Dune. I'm trying to go back to classics. Tolstoy, this is really strange. I am late in life on Tolstoy. You could not have had me read him at any other point in my life, but over the last few years. And I like him better than Dostoevsky. I mean, everybody kept pointing me to Dostoevsky, Brothers Karamazov.
Yeah.
And this is terrible to admit, but I got 100 pages into that. And I remember thinking, if I have to listen to one more diatribe from this drunken Russian, I'm gonna throw the book across the room because of the way it was written, and it just kind of kept going on and on. But Tolstoy, a friend of mine just said, "Oh no, you've got to read Anna Karenina,"
Yeah.
And so I started reading it, and I was immediately drawn in to Tolstoy's writing and his characterization and his insights. Just these throwaway lines that he would do of humanity, and realized, okay, I like Tolstoy better than Dostoevsky, though I wouldn't forego Dostoevsky. I think he's incredible. Dickens, the same. When I read Dickens, Mark Twain was a big influence on me. So in terms of a lot of the books and some of those classics, but honestly, and this, you won't be surprised because you like Father Gilbert, but in the early days, Stephen King,
Sure.
some of those writers, Dean Koontz, a few of those.
Yeah.
Though actually now I appreciate Dean Koontz because he actually tends to explore morality in there are moral things that he explores, I think, at a deeper level than Stephen King does.
Sure.
But I'm saying that without having read a Stephen King book in a very long time.
Sure.
So that may have changed.
King is great.
But yeah, I mean, I'm kind of all over the place, really.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. I just have to bring up that it's really wonderful talking to you, but it is a little disconcerting to be hearing the voice of Philip Glossman.
Oh gosh, yeah. Well,
Was that a plan? Did you know you were going to be a pivotal character? Were you excited to play that?
Well, see, my version of the story, then, by the way, and I now realize late in life to be able to say this to people, that if you ever are asked to play a bad guy, come up with a different voice.
Mm.
Come up, don't.
'Cause
This is the only voice I
Philip.
have. This is the only voice I have. And if I'd really thought about it, I think if I'd realized what was happening, I think I would have either not done it at all, or would have done something different. Because basically it's my voice with a particular attitude.
Yeah.
And so I actually, they asked me to go in because I'm only a stone's throw from Focus on the Family. And I actually got a message from one of the guys saying, now, look, we know you're going to say no, but will you say yes anyway? Could you come in and do a few Glossman lines? So I said, yeah, okay. And they sent me the scripts and I went in to record them. But it actually was interesting because I walked through the door thinking, well, this can't be too hard. It's my voice. But when I sat down, I realized there is a particular attitude that changes my voice. So it's my voice, but to really be him, I had to kind of find that attitude again and then deliver the lines. But so there are two versions of the story. Very quickly, one of the versions is my side, which is my memory was I got pulled into the studio because we were in Pomona at the time and we had our own studio there. And if you listen to some of the early episodes, you actually could tell where we pulled people in like a secretary, somebody from somewhere in the building, and said, look, we just want you to do this voice. And you really can tell the difference between the professionals and the not professionals.
Sure.
So I remember there were occasions when I would get pulled in just to fill in on something and play little parts. And I wasn't comfortable doing it, but because I'm not an actor, I never perceived myself as an actor, but it's like, well, we'll do it for the team, I'll go in. And so Phil had written Glossman. So from my understanding, I was filling in for Glossman until we got somebody else to record the lines. And normally we do what we call wild it, so that we just make sure that when I'm in with the other actors, they don't overlap with my lines so that you could replace me. And that was my memory, faulty as it is, was that's what we were doing. And then the next thing was, oh, no, we think you're good. We're going to leave it. We're not going to replace your lines. And then I'm thinking, well, that's okay. This will be a one-off. We're not going to ever see this guy again. So, one-off episode, there's my claim to fame. Well, and then he shows up and he started to show up. And so only recently, Phil and I were doing one of these. And Phil actually admitted that the real story from his point of view was that in his mind, I was always going to play Glossman. And the way he put it, and this doesn't, I just want to say this gently for the sake of my own ego, but Phil said that there were times in the office when I could have a certain attitude, just get a bit glib, a little sarcastic, a little something. And what he wanted was a character with that attitude. And so he said, and again, I only got this recently, was that it was always his intention that I was going to play this character. So we got a collision of two different perspectives, but either way, then I wound up with it. And then I've got this, I'm stuck with my voice with people going, I can be in a situation and suddenly you almost see heads kind of going up if I'm talking somewhere. And then you can see the kids are like, something's not right here.
Yeah.
The room temperature has changed because Glossman has somehow come into the room.
Right.
And I had one kid who just looked at me one day and said, are you Philip Glossman? And I said, well, no, I play Philip Glossman. I'm not Philip Glossman. I play it. And he just looked at me and he said, I don't like you. And he turned around and walked away. And I thought, this is my life. This is my legacy now.
Yeah.
So,
Edge biter chemical spills on Tom Riley's farm. That's right. Well,
Exactly.
the dynamics though between you and Regis Blackguard with the voices and everything meshing, it worked just so well
Yeah.
though. It worked really well.
And that's easy when you're playing off of somebody like Earl Bowen.
Yeah.
He made it easy to quiver in my boots because he was so intimidating. For me to sit across from him doing lines with him,
Sure.
it was easy for me to be sniveling
Yeah.
because he was that powerful. So that was okay.
Odyssey had a lot of bad guys. I really we love the Novacom series and everything, but I do think Regis Blackguard, I think that character plays probably the best nemesis out of all.
Yeah. Oh no, without question. And the thing that Phil was after was just that, a nemesis.
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny because of Blackguard, our view was, well, he has to be the anti-wit. And and how we played that out as he and I were writing it. But I mean, it was originally, Phil was definitely, it was his idea. And he just, he had it. This is the anti-wit. And so we're going to play that out. So when you embody that in a character, and then a character as well written and well played as Blackguard was, it just all came together as a great villain. When we got to Novacom, I was determined that we couldn't do Blackguard again.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, we can't do a rerun of Blackguard. We're not going to do, and we created other nemesis, for, see, if Eugene were here, he would know.
He would know.
But we knew that I didn't want to rerun anything. We never really liked to. And so when we got to Novacom, we said, okay, what if the bad guy is an entity? What if the bad guy is not necessarily an individual, but a consortium of people who are trying to do what they're trying to do? And so it was purposeful not to kind of create another bad guy in that respect.
Sure.
In fact, we never really went back, even when I did the Green Ring Conspiracy, and as we've written other, plot lines like that, the going back to Blackguard, you just, when you get it right or that right, you just don't want to taint it by doing a bad job later with someone that everyone's going to say, oh, they're just, he's just trying to be Blackguard.
Sure.
You just don't want to do that. You want to come up with something fresh and new and different.
Yeah. Yeah. And just as a total aside, we needed more Crying Brian Dern episodes. Every episode that Crying Brian's in, I still laugh uproariously. So it's.
Yeah, he should, if we had the time and budget, what we should have done at the time was create a program for him.
Yes.
Just asides that whenever we had him in the studio doing the actual scripts, take him off to another room and just record. See, nowadays you just do it and call them podcasts.
Yeah.
Right.
But back in the day, we just didn't really have anything except bonus material. But a Crying Brian Dern podcast actually would have been quite funny.
He could have been Frasier, you had him on Cheers, and then you take the character and move him to his own show. That could have been Crying Brian Dern.
And can you imagine him answering calls and trying to give advice? I think that would be a brilliant thing.
That would be wonderful.
Would be great.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you're working on right now? Lots of things you're
we're still I'm in post-production on a few things, and ranging from working on some videos. There's one video script that I'm working on for the Augustine Institute, where I work, which is about the titles of Jesus. The new Adam, the new Moses, son of Abraham, son of David, those things, and to unpack those a bit. So I still do sort of nonfiction type teaching stuff, though this is for sixth graders. This is written for a particular age group.
Wow.
And we have a audio drama, like the radio theater stuff, but it's about Joan of Arc. So it's the story of Joan of Arc. So that's coming out in the next month or so. And I've been working on novels, some new kids novels, The Adventures of Nick and Sam and the Virtue Chronicles. So those are different kinds of things. And it's if I look at my list, I just feel like I've got 5 or 6 different things that are going on in various stages of effort.
Sure.
Some new scripts for some shows, things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything in your career, you've done a lot, you've written a lot, but anything in your career you haven't done that you still would like to do?
Well, a lot, and that's my problem. I've just got I've got notebooks filled with ideas that I still think are good ideas that I'd love to play out, but again, I don't have time. More screenplays. I did Beyond the Mask.
Yes, we just saw that
with the Burns boys.
That was good.
And and I did that, and it was a huge learning curve for me in terms of I'd written some screenplays before, but to work with these guys was great experience, big learning curve for me. And then the thing is, once you have a learning curve like that, I'm thinking, well, I'd like to take the learning curve and now work on another screenplay just to see if I learned what I thought I learned on the other one.
Sure.
To do it better and to do that. I wish they'd actually done more, like a sequel to that, if they'd been able to.
Yeah.
Because we really, I enjoyed the characters. I enjoyed the situation.
Yeah.
Though I actually begged them, I really wish they had done it as like a binge-worthy series, like a Netflix kind of thing.
Sure.
Because if you watch the movie, it feels very compressed to me.
Yeah.
Whereas I'm feeling like, boy, if we could have played those out, all the segments in different episodes, I think it would have been amazing, actually.
Yeah. That was we just watched it a few nights ago, actually, and we really enjoyed it. It was a good film. Yep.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, and it's all Chad and Aaron Burns. Those guys, I got my name on a credit for the writing, but honestly, it's their vision. It was their ambition to even do something like that. I thought was amazing.
Yeah.
To tell that kind of a story when nobody else was sort of telling those kinds of stories. I think it was fantastic.
Yeah, it was very good. Well, Paul, we want to thank you so much for your time and being on the podcast. It's a sincere pleasure.
Oh, my pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Love of Life podcast, Conversations with Jesse and Courtney.
It is our duty through our schools to create a new one, a God-centered one. We are told in Proverbs 8, verses 35 and 36, "For whoso findeth me findeth life, and shall obtain favor of the Lord. But he that sinneth against me wrongeth his own soul. All they that hate me love death."